Hey, this is Jeff Massey with Reverb.com, and welcome back. This is another video about slide guitar, and in this video I'd like to actually talk about getting started and actually playing and getting some techniques down that you'll need to get rolling with it. One thing that's of major importance when you're playing the slide guitar is intonating the note correctly. Otherwise, you'll notice right away, because it can really be not the most pleasant sound to listen to if you're not. So one thing you want to get used to is, for example, say I'm playing a note at the 5th fret on the G string. Or even the D string as well. When I'm playing that note, I'm literally playing over the 5th fret itself and not the 5th fret space. Normally in musical terms, when we say fret, we mean the space if we're fretting a note. But with a slide, if you listen, if I go over the space rather than the actual fret, note is actually flat. So you always want to shoot for getting over the fret. You can always play around with that flat tone and go back to the fretted note. Just sit over the space, it's going to produce a flat sound. And another thing that's really important when you're doing this is the attack. It looks like, you know, when you see somebody playing slide, sometimes it looks like they're playing aggressively. And actually, when I'm playing slide, I'm barely putting any pressure on the strings whatsoever. I'm just letting the slide lay on the strings. If you try to press down like you're pressing a chord, you run the risk of having a really, harsh brass sound, and not in a good way. Another thing I'd like to talk about is your right hand technique, assuming you're right-handed. A lot of slide players like to play with just using their fingers, some with a pick, some with their pick and their fingers. Again, this is preference. It depends on what kind of tone you're going for. Me, when I started learning slide, I just naturally played with a pick, but depending on the song, I have a tendency to use the fingers too. But I think a lot of players like the fingers because you get a nice natural warm sound with the skin of your fingers. And the pick might be a little more of a sharper sound. But again, the advantage for me to doing both is I've got the pick and I've got the other fingers to do, chordal things or little melodies. So again, kind of personal preference. A lot of the greats, if I'm not mistaken, like Ry Cooder and Duane Allman and people like that, I generally play with their fingers. So I don't know where I got the pick thing from, but again, up to you. Another thing I like to discuss with the right hand technique is having control. It's really important to have control of your note selection and what strings you're not using. So, with me, I kind of have my palm just kind of resting here across the bass strings. It's important to have that palm kind of laying here and have that control, because you don't want notes sustaining that you don't want in the chord or lick, because you can get a lot of strange overtones that are very unpleasant to the ear if you're not doing it correctly. So again, for me, I just kind of rest it here. That way all these fingers are ready to play a note or stop a note if need be. Last but not least would be the vibrato technique itself. And this can vary from player to player, just like when you're playing, regular fretted guitar. For me, rather than an up and down motion with bending, it's a back and forth type of motion. There's two main vibratos that I use, and one would be more of the wrist. And I kind of get a faster, stingier kind of vibrato. And then sometimes I'll use more of my whole arm to get a wider. So again, just preference, depends on the riff you're playing. That would apply to something subtle too, something softer. And then more of the arm vibrato here. One somewhat basic riff that comes to mind, a common blues riff kind of in the style of Little Red Rooster, something like that. I'm going from the 5th fret, which would be a C, to the 3rd fret, which would be a B flat, up to the octave, the 12th fret. And the riff would go as this. So that would be a good thing to start with. Real common, but real cool at the same time. Thanks for tuning in today. In the next video, I'm going to be discussing different tunings you can use for slide guitar. So until then.